Buonasera, possiamo chiudere questa porta per piacere, grazie, ciao Fabio. Buonasera, benvenuti. Benvenuti a questa tavola rotonda che ha un... Il canale inglese che numero è? 1, 2? 2. English Channels number 2. Buonasera, questa tavola rotonda che ha un titolo molto altisonante, la cui il futuro del giornalismo, qualche riflessione sulle tensioni che stiamo vivendo, forse la risposta di una tavola rotonda, la vera risposta si dice saperlo. Però invece siamo qui per cercare di discuterne anche alla fine, no? Di un percorso come quello del Festival del Giornalismo, che forse ci ha dato degli strumenti per aiutarci a rifletterci. Io sono Mario Tedeschini Lalli, sono membro del comitato direttivo della ONA, Online News Association, che ha organizzato questo evento in collaborazione con il Festival del Giornalismo, come facciamo da alcuni anni. È la più grande organizzazione professionale di giornalisti digitali e siamo molto contenti che anche in questa tavola rotonda, oltre agli eventi che abbiamo già organizzato, tanti di voi siano qui a contribuire. La tavola rotonda sarà condotta da Eric Carvin, che è qui alla mia destra, che è social media editor dell'Associated Press, dell'agenzia Associated Press, nella quale, se ho capito bene, lavora da 13 anni con varie funzioni editoriali. A lui la parola, che presenterà i nostri ospiti e condurrà il dibattito che spero vedrà anche voi partecipi. Il dibattito da questa parte del tavolo si svolgerà in lingua inglese. Chi ne ha bisogno può prendere le cuffie di traduzione simultanea fuori dalla porta. Le domande potranno essere poste sia in inglese sia in italiano e ringraziamo in anticipo gli amici che ci aiutano con la traduzione simultanea. Grazie.
Okay, grazie Mario. All right, so first of all, before I dive into the substance of this, I just wanted to give a shout out to ONA, the Online News Association, which is co-sponsoring this particular event. They're the largest organization in the world dedicated to digital journalism. And they historically have been primarily in the US, but they have been becoming increasingly global in recent years, which is very important to me because I'm in a global news organization, the AP. And they have a chapter here and in various other places. So learn more about ONA if you don't already know. Become a member if there is either here or wherever it is that you may live. And if they don't have a chapter, it's not a bad idea to start one. So let's go ahead and dive in. We have about 50 minutes to figure out the future of journalism. So let's...
only take 30.
Yeah, okay. Well, great. Then we'll have time for questions. Seriously, we will want to take some questions. And related to that, some of you may have seen, some of us tweeted it earlier. If you want to tweet your questions during the course of the session, we have a hashtag we created just for this, which is JournoFuture, JournoFuture. So you can tweet questions, or you can go ahead and ask them when we get toward the end, when it's time for questions, and we'll be looking for them. I think Anna's going to keep an eye on the ones that are in Italian. And so to introduce the other speakers we have today, immediately to my right, this is Greg Galant. Greg is the CEO and founder of Sawhorse Media, which primarily does two things. They created Muckrack, which is a website that is all about journalists on Twitter, and in some ways for journalists on Twitter. And he may go into a little bit more about what it is. And they also created the Shorty Awards, which is an awards ceremony for the best of what happens on social media. Some of it serious, but a lot of it tongue-in-cheek, and it really, from what I've heard, a very entertaining event. So that's Greg, to my right. And immediately to his right is Anna Masera. Anna is the social media editor at La Stampa, and the first social media editor at a newspaper in Italy, as I understand it. Had spent many years as digital editor, I think was the title, before moving in to her exciting new role last year. So that's what we've got here. So let's dive into some questions. I'm gonna So I'm a social media editor, so I'm going to start with something related to that. I've done a lot of other things at AP, as as mentioned before, but let's start in my wheelhouse. So now we're in a world now where anybody can be a journalist at any moment. Now, they aren't necessarily receiving a salary as a journalist. It's not necessarily their job, but they can suddenly become one. There are a lot of people who, whether they're in the right place at the right time or they just decide to go looking for a story, they pull out their phone, they take a picture, they capture some video. Suddenly, maybe you can debate what exactly they are, but arguably, these are journalists just emerging out there in the world among amateurs. So what I want to start by talking about here is how the role of the professional journalist has changed. And part of this, there's a good question asked in one of the other panels over the last couple of days, is whether the profession of the journalist is something that will go away sometime, or there will always be such a thing as professional journalists. So let's start with that whole notion and what has evolved in that way. Greg, you want to offer some thoughts?
Yeah, sure. So I think there's this really...
turn that on.
Oh, now I know how to operate a mic in Italy. So I think there's this kind of really interesting thing where it used to be that not everybody could kind of do journalism because they didn't have the tool set. They could write something, but there was no way to publish it. For a while, it was even hard to do things like take good photos and distribute them. But now it seems like we kind of live in this world where anyone can become a journalist and anybody can do journalism. Yet I think a lot of people are very quick to take like an extra leap and say, well, that puts everybody, there's kind of no use in having the distinction anymore about who's a journalist and who isn't a journalist. One of the big values that we bring with Muckrack is not only anybody can create a profile on Muckrack, but we also verify who journalists are. And I think that there's still a lot of room for profession in the same way that, if you were choking during lunch, I could perform the Heimlich, so I provided you with medical care, yet, I wouldn't venture to call myself a doctor. And then the internet's made it much better in that I could read about how to do, how to treat a friend who's in trouble and learn more about medicine and may provide that better, but I'm still just not a doctor. I think that there's always going to be the room for whatever you want to call it, a journalist, someone who just reports the news, a room for someone who's a professional at doing this, who's going to dedicate their life to it, have, a higher level, hold themselves to a professional form of ethics, and kind of really master, what it is to do journalism.
Okay, we're gonna talk about ethics a little later, and also issues related to accuracy and where that's going in the future. I'm starting to think you only had lunch with me for the metaphor, by the way. So Anna, on the same idea. So where do you see the profession that is journalism going? Do you see it going away someday? Do you think it has evolved in a pretty significant way, and particularly factoring in the influence that providers of amateur content have, or even simply witnesses having the ability to share what they see in words and in visuals directly with the public?
Okay, that's it. Only two mics can be on at the same time. That's the Italian way. Hi, everybody. I've been here since Wednesday, and I've been following all the panels. So I must say that I've learned a lot, and that I'm actually coming away from this journalism festival more confused than when I arrived. I mean, I thought I knew what my future was going to be, and actually I'm leaving that I'm really disconcerted, because on one level, I've heard a lot of pessimism. I mean, for example, from Emily Bell. I don't know how many people were here yesterday for the Emily Bell keynote. Okay, so you all heard her when she said, disintegrate. You're wasting your time if you're trying to integrate. That's what she told me personally afterwards also, because I said, oh my God, we're trying to integrate. You're telling me we should disintegrate, and we're not ready for that yet. I mean, we feel like we've been disintegrated throughout until now, and now we thought that our mission was to integrate paper and web. So I am a bit disconcerted now that after I talked to her. But then I heard many others saying, well, don't worry too much about that. I mean, you guys are Italian, you're lagging behind, you have the language barrier, which in your case can be an advantage because, you know, you're not competing with the big guys. You know, I mean, The Guardian is competing with the New York Times, but I mean, La Stampa is competing with Corriere and La Repubblica, not with the New York Times. So we are not ready yet to disintegrate and to, you know, to compete with alternative forms of journalism that have emerged and that seem very successful, because citizens journalism and bloggers and journalism that comes from the bottom up is actually very competitive sometimes with newspapers. But in Italy, I mean, we still do have, we're still doing okay as far as making a salary at the end of the month. However, we are all very aware that it's going to last very little, and it would be completely blind and very short-termed if we tried to work a strategy saying that, I mean, we will be existing in the next 10 years. I don't think we will. So I learned that, and I'm pretty sure of that. I mean, it's going to be a few years, and in these few years, we have to hurry up and learn from these guys. So I've learned a lot from you, Andy, for example.
Andy. Eric. My brother's Andy.
My goodness, we just talked at
Get
lunch.
that out of the way early.
He's the brother, of course.
Yes, Andy was on the stage last year.
But Eric,
No.
the good thing is that Eric and Andy converged. I mean, I tweeted this earlier on. I mean, they converged the industries because, you know, as Eric is the journalist and Andy is the more techie guy in the family. But I mean, the two of you converged, and you're both doing actually digital information now. So sorry for the confusion. But anyways, okay. Eric, I've learned a lot from you. For example, being a social media editor, when I had to start this new job, I looked up at your netiquette in terms of rules and social media and how to apply those kind of rules also in Italian journalism, and we try to apply yours. We found them a bit too strict because the Anglo-Saxon journalism is much more, has ethics that are much more severe than ours, but in the end we did find sort of an intermediate term, and definitely you were very helpful in showing me what should be applied and what not. I think our future is a real hybrid of digital and paper. Tonight I have to write a story about Ioanni Sanchez, the blogger who's going to be here at 9 p.m. and at Sala Notari. And I have to write a story that's a paper story. And earlier on, I was being suggested by Eric and by Gregory, you should just do a Storyfy. A Storyfy of the evening would be the best solution. That's the best way to write the story. But can you imagine printing in paper a Storyfy on the event? I mean, in Italy, it's never been done.
Yes, we can imagine that. That's exactly the reason.
That's the thing. And now I'm trying to figure out, they can imagine it. Can you guys imagine an Italian paper printing a Storyfy? Can you raise your hands? Show your hands. One person, 2, 3. Okay, so 4 people all together. So it seems that we're not ready. I mean, my editor-in-chief says, when you write for the paper, Anna, you have to remember the paper readers are average 60 years old, and my mom, you have to write remembering that my mom should be able to understand you. I mean, just the word Storyfy already cuts her out. We have a huge cultural digital divide in Italy, and people don't understand Macrack, Storyfy, social media editors. I mean, those are terms that in paper don't make any sense. We should always have to publish a little dictionary next to it.
You know, Anna, there's something interesting here that I wonder if there's an opportunity in the Italian media, because I do get the sense from having been here for a few days too, that in some ways you're on a different point in the timeline from where we are in the English language media. That maybe, in a way, you have a little more time to work with to be able to deal with this transformation, and that maybe you can watch all of the stumbles that we've had to deal with a little further west and learn from them. The question is whether that sort of an openness to that will develop. Because it's interesting, when you talk about a print story, even the notion of a print story doesn't exist nearly as much in the US and perhaps in the UK as it once did. People do stories. They go on print, they go online, maybe they're a little different. and there maybe you do something a little different for print in order to have something that survives for the next day and isn't as much in the moment. But when you're covering something urgently, it's mostly digital that you're thinking about. Do you think there's an opportunity here? And what do you think the next step would be to try to inch in that direction and to sort of avoid getting kind of stuck in the old way when the people of Italy are ready to move forward?
I think you're absolutely right. I mean, we are in a different timeline, and we do have the opportunity to learn from mistakes that have been made in the more innovative countries that have experimented more. And we can try to find an Italian way, which doesn't necessarily have to be the same as the American or the English way. And but I do think that the shift, the post-industrial journalism is a fact, and it's happening here in Italy too. And the public, the cultural thing about young people not reading papers anymore is a fact, and the fact that young people are only digital is a fact. I don't know any kids. I teach in a high school in Torino, and hardly any of them read the paper version. If they have a paper version at home, it's because their parents buy it, but they would never buy it.
Where's the sort of age cutoff that you visualize it? Below what age would you say people in Italy typically aren't physically picking up a newspaper anymore? Mm-hmm. That's the thing that'd be interesting to compare to the U.S. Because I think Americans in their 20s and maybe into their 30s don't really pick up newspapers very much anymore either.
Yeah.
And do you think that's different here?
No, I think here, 30 years old. I think it's the working age, and the problem is in Italy many people don't have jobs, so the working age is the problem. I mean, people who work, who have a job, have access, they are willing to pay, because there's a paywall problem there too. I mean, digital means also free in Italy. We don't have such paywalls that mean digital is subscription. I mean, most Italians who read digital, it's because they are not paying for it too. Right. That's a main issue. It's a money issue too. So I mean, buying the newspaper is an expense that many people can't afford, even at an older age. So in Italians who get a job more and more at an older age too. So I think definitely in the 30s.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm gonna come back to the notion of the actual paper in a little bit. But before I do, you brought up something that was interesting. I'm going to bring Greg in on, which was the question, which was the issue of the way you mentioned our social media guidelines at AP and how you looked at them and maybe borrowed some notions from it, adapted it a little bit for the media culture here. One of the things that I'm curious about looking toward the future of journalism is the way that journalists conduct themselves in the public sphere. How that has evolved in recent years and what's likely to happen in the coming years. I think there was a time not long ago when our journalists at AP were fairly anonymous, and even at newspapers, they may have been known for their byline, but people know a whole lot more about them now. Greg, you spent a lot of time learning about the intimate details of every journalist in the world. Do you feel like people are sharing more? Do you think that they're handling things like their personal lives, their opinions differently than they might have been? And do you see that going in any particular direction?
I think it's important to step back and realize this is the first time in the history, really, journalists have been able to write anything that doesn't go through an editor before going live, save for maybe a birthday card to a family member. So it's this kind of wild thing.
You mean a tweet, in other words, or a post?
That's right. Yeah, with a tweet and a post, because we kind of got to watch it all happen to begin with. And there was a big question because before Twitter, if you were a journalist and you started a personal blog without telling your employer, you'd probably get fired. Right. And it was just a wonder that somehow all these journalists managed to get on Twitter before their publications could fire them.
Before they noticed in some cases.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Really before they noticed. And by the time they were all on it, there were too many people to fire. And that's why journalists are on Twitter and now other social platforms today.
Well, hopefully some of the bosses realized there was a benefit to this as well.
That's right. Or it's still coming and you're all going to get fired.
Yeah, it's possible.
I think it's too late for that.
We can all just stay here in Perugia.
So I think that people make a mistake in two ways. One is that people try to be too buttoned up on social media and they're like, well, this is my professional account. I can only tweet links. Anything I say has the full weight of the AP or whoever my employer is behind it. So I think on one hand, meeting somebody on Twitter is like, I've heard this analogy before, and I think it's perfect, is kind of like meeting someone at a cocktail party, right? Where, if you meet a journalist at the cocktail party from the AP, not only do you expect them to speak eloquently about whatever it is they cover in the news, and you'd probably like them to give you updates on that, but, they're also going to talk about their kids and what they did this weekend and their trip to Perugia and all that. So, I think just to be interesting, it's important to be well-rounded and kind of put yourself out there.
One of the first pieces of advice I got on Twitter before I joined was from the person who was then my boss, who's my predecessor for my current job, Lauren McCullough.
She got fired for using Twitter too much?
Yes, exactly.
I know Lauren, she's great.
No, she didn't get fired. Anyway, so she moved on to a different job, and but long before that, when I first joined Twitter, she said, look, I know that you're mostly, at least initially, doing this for work, but find something about yourself to share. It doesn't mean share everything about yourself, but find something. Even if it's just a hobby, even if it's something that something you're comfortable about being public with. Mine is a little bit of a strange example. I'm sort of a nature person, and one thing I like to do is go into city parks and forage for berries and things like that. It has absolutely nothing to do with my job. I wrote a story about it once, years and years ago. Nothing to do with my job. But it was something that I was, I already talked to people about. I like taking pictures of it, which also fits in well. So this was this other thing that allowed people to see a little bit more humanity about me. And I think that's one thing that's transformed about what journalists are becoming like as people in the public sphere. They're becoming more like people. And I think that's being encouraged, even at places like a newswire or a news agency, where that might not have been the case as much before. I'm going to bring Mario into this on something that was some of what Anna was talking about before, which is we were talking about the print story that she has to write tonight. I'm glad you have an example for us to work with right now. I hope you do a nice job on it too. And the distinctions between print and digital, I'm assuming that there's still a primacy of the print side of it, that it's given more. It's given a higher sort of status in a way here. Do you think that the continued existence of newsprint at all is standing in the way of journalism surviving, moving forward in a place like Italy? Is it too soon to be talking about that? Because certainly in America, we have conversations about whether news is eventually simply not going to be printed on paper anymore.
Well, if the question is some kind of printed news going to be there in 15 years? Answer is, I don't know and I don't care. Whether perhaps there is a more deeper question there, which is probably the one that Emily Bell addressed yesterday, and whether, this is something that I understand in the US has been argued a lot, whether traditional newsrooms or traditional newsroom cultures may hinder somehow the development of a new digital newsroom culture, and whether the merging of the two may be a problem. And that's why she said, while interviewed by Anna, disintegrate. I think that in this country, given what you said, it's pretty true. Still, the print media is by and large considered, even though they are not exactly like that, but the agenda-setting media of the country. I think we still need a measure of integration. What I and my friend Claudio Giua called in an essay that we wrote 2 years ago, the integration of brains. We have to bring the heavy hitters of Italian journalism to understand that digital is the world in which they are set, and that digital is not a technology, is a culture they have to know and they have to belong to. Then they can decide to write on paper, to just shout their news out of the window, whatever they prefer. Digital has nothing to do with the means of delivery. Digital has to do with your life, and journalists are supposed to watch what's going on in the world and report it. And to do that, I think we still need this, shall we say, integration period to carry home their brains.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I think we still everywhere in the world still get stuck on is that the death of paper, if it ever does come along, means the death of the newspaper. And, well, yes, I guess in a physical, tangible, literal sense it might. And maybe we're stuck on the word paper a little bit. But, I mean, you know, if you look in the, again, the English-speaking world, there are amazing stories that are broken by places like the New York Times and by The Guardian and indeed by AP and others that are destined for the newspaper, but they're breaking the stories online. And the content is being produced, but the first destination of that content seems to be online. And I wonder if that's something that we're going to see shift. I just want to remind everybody the hashtag, again, is #GiornoFuture. I'm starting to see a few questions come in. They appear to all be in Italian, so it'll be, somebody else will be looking at those. But let me move on to another topic.
Well, if you read them out, they'll translate.
That's true. I could read. I could try my accent here. Are there any questions here, or are people simply retweeting us, Anna? Oh, you want to turn? Yeah, that seems like a terrible idea. No, you go ahead. Yes. Are you on over there?
Not on.
I could give you a minute if you need.
Yeah, let me just find the questions first. I have lots of comments here. Okay.
Maybe let me bring up another topic here while you're reviewing those.
Yeah,
So we were talking. We started to get into the topic of accuracy, or we sort of glanced against it before. It's one thing that I think the industry's been struggling with over the course, especially of some recent months. There's been a lot of a call for a return to verification, accuracy, authentication of content and of information that some feel has been somewhat wanting in the digital world, that has somewhat lagged behind the way that information has been verified traditionally in print and broadcast journalism over the years. And this was really particularly brought to light with the Boston bombings recently, where there was a lot of bad information that flew around. Some of it, to be fair, was being distributed over traditional broadcast channels as well, but much of it, shall we say, flew faster because of social media and because of the sort of pressure of speed. Now, I'm gonna bring Greg in on this first. I'm sure Anna has some thoughts as well. But do you think that we're on the cusp of sort of a renaissance of accuracy and verification? Do you think that it's finally coming home to the world of digital journalism in a more robust way than it has been before?
So I think in terms of accuracy, you know, there's kind of two levels to it. One is, I think, for everything that I said about journalists being able to kind of tweet more personally and be a real human being on Twitter. At the same time, when they tweet about the news, especially whatever their beat is, I think they still have equal of responsibility to be accurate, because people, and largely, you know, I mean, this is one of the values that Muckrack brings, is that you can see journalists by their publication. And I think if it's known that they're with the New York Times, it's still fine, or the AP, it's still fine to talk about your family vacation. But if you're going to talk about the news, there's some expectation you're going to be better at it than anybody else, or better at getting it right and know when it's vetted. And I think in terms of the future, this is one area where journalists can stay relevant if people know whatever the social platform is, Twitter, Facebook, Tumblr, Vine, that, you know, if I get content from this journalist, it's going to be more accurate and give me a better view of the world than from an amateur.
So is this sort of maybe some of how the professional journalist survives? Is this sort of the implication here, that a lot of information, everybody says when news breaks, it breaks on Twitter now. It's the first place you see it. And you often see it straight from the source of somebody who's on the ground and who happens to be witnessing something. So does the job of the professional journalist become more to sort of separate fact from fiction, to put some context around what's being reported, and in some cases to even shoot something down and to explain, oh, that's somebody who is actually has some kind of bias and is not offering a straight account of what they're seeing?
Yeah, that's exactly it. And if you look at, you know, Boston, for example, had that happened, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, probably even 5 years ago, like, just to get photos of what was going on would have been something that you'd need a journalist for. You would have needed to send out that truck with the journalist, and some guy with an SLR take the pictures, run it back to the newsroom, get it on the web, print it, disseminate that information, because otherwise how else would it happen? Today it's kind of irrelevant if the Boston Globe sends somebody to the scene of what happened, because there are going to be, you know, thousands of, as we saw, photos, now videos, you know, every kind of media you want is going to be captured by the amateurs, but what's hard to know is what's real. So I think for the journalist, it's more about playing that role of verification, editing, curation, kind of figuring out of this sea of content that comes out of any news event, what's real, and like you said, very important, as some journalists did, to shoot it down. And I think one of the good things about what we have now, as much criticism as there might be for what inaccurate news that was spread, Never Faster has itself corrected and kind of, you know, shot down bad information more quickly than in the social media era.
It's interesting. There are also, it's good to mention, I think, at this point, there are a lot of new tools that have really made it even easier to even more quickly get this kind of content more precisely from amateurs and get it into the hands of journalists so they can look at it and verify it. At AP, when the bombings happened in Boston, we were looking in real time at social content that was being shared in the couple of hours before and the few minutes after the bombing in a about 5 to 10 block radius right around where the bombings happened. That's something you can do now, and it's not that hard. There are tools for we were using Geophedia, which is a tool that you can use for that sort of thing, and others are being developed. And then so we can speed up the process of getting that information, thus freeing up some time for us to look at the content and be reporters about it, to essentially be digital reporters where we're going through and making phone calls, trying to reach out to the people who capture the content and figuring out what we can trust and what we can, and what's legit and what's not. Anna?
I would like actually to tell you some of the questions.
Oh, yeah, please, toss one in. We're ready.
We're getting some interesting ones.
Good.
And then afterwards, if there's time, I'll never answer you. But I mean, there's this question that I find interesting is, how can journalists monetize their brand on Twitter?
I hope I don't have to answer that question. I'm the moderator. You may have to answer it yourself, Anna. Well, I mean, it's an interesting question. I know that speaking of, I know that part of what we're trying to do here is look back a little bit at what's happened in the festival over the last few days. And one name who keeps coming up is Andrew Sullivan, who has found a way to basically go out on his own and establish. I won't say establish a brand, because he had already established his brand. That's sort of the whole point. But essentially become an independent journalist on the go, and actually monetize that and turn it into a business. Do you see a lot of potential in this, Greg? I mean, do you think this is? Do you think if we're at a time where institutional journalism has more and more challenges, where more people go out on their own, or is this something that's really limited to a select few recognizable kind of brand names who have that kind of recognition?
I think journalists are monetizing their Twitter following every day largely by getting jobs is probably the #1 way. But it's something where, you know, before, like we were saying, you know, the journalists were, with few exceptions, were relatively obscure. So, you know, hiring a journalist was just a way of increasing your ability to get content. Whereas today, because one of the #1 ways that people are getting traffic, and that the biggest growth driver of traffic today is social, that the journalists aren't just a way to create the content, but they're a way to spread the content, to pull in audiences. So, you know, I mean, we know for a fact from our view with Muckrack that there are many editors going on there, and, you know, for sure, no one's going to hire anybody without checking their Twitter feed and seeing how many followers do they have, how many Facebook subscribers do they have, both because they know if they hire a journalist, they get a built-in audience of who follows that journalist. But maybe more importantly, if they're savvy and they know how to write an article and how to spread it the right way on social media, that even if that journalist doesn't have a huge following themselves, it might be that they know how to write articles in such a way that they're optimized to be shared, which makes a big difference. So I think in the short term, it's already happening where it's a big criteria for a job. And then I think in the longer term, it sets journalists like Andrew Sullivan up to be more entrepreneurial, because they're already operating this kind of mini machine where they're both creating content and disseminating it.
You know, it's an interesting inverse of Andrew Sullivan would be someone like Nate Silver, who established himself as a brand name independently and parlayed it into a pretty sweet job at the New York Times. And I think there may be even more people who would like to go in that direction. And I mean, that happens on a very, very small scale all the time, where a lot of young journalists getting into the profession, it's a challenging time to become a journalist in a lot of ways, but one of the nice things about becoming a journalist right now is there are so many ways you can just be a journalist before you even have the job. You can start a blog, you can get active on social media, you can even develop a beat without even having a staff position yet, and people notice that, and then you can get employed.
Questions.
Oh, good. Shoot us.
And actually, I would like to involve you with the answer too.
Oh no.
One of the questions is: are foreign correspondents redundant? And I'll tell you the 2 or 3 questions that came out.
Okay.
Another question: is the future of journalism going to exist without journalists themselves? I mean, is it going to be all drones in the future? We don't have drones in Italy yet, but I mean, it seems like in America and in many other countries, they're starting to be used a lot. So can you tell us what you think of that experience?
Let me start with a couple. Well, I actually had drones on my list, believe it or not. We got to talk about drones. Talking about the future of journalism. We got to go sci-fi on everybody here. So let's start with the somewhat more mundane but equally interesting question about foreign correspondents. I mean, the reality is that for a lot of news organizations, foreign correspondents are going away. I mean, there are very, very few of them. I don't think that they'll ever completely vanish. Yes, there are people who are on the ground where things are happening, but there's still, especially around complicated stories, I still think there's a benefit of having an expert on the ground, somebody who knows what the story is, who knows how to work their sources at the same time that they're witnessing things, and can put this material in context, understanding the full story, and ideally the place that they're covering. I know that this is something I hear from AP reporters around the world, and we've got about 2,000 reporters around the world in something like 300 bureaus, and a lot of times our reporters in certain locations, they used to have 5 or 6 or 7 other people from other news organizations that they could all go out drinking with at the end of the day, and sometimes now they're alone. Or they're there with somebody from Reuters, or one person from the New York Times, or one person from the BBC, and that's it. I mean, in some ways, it gives us a little bit of a competitive advantage sometimes, but I think that dwindling presence overall is a little bit troubling. Yes, there are witnesses who are there, and yes, we can look at that content and verify it, and we should. But I still think that there is value in having people on the ground who can understand the real depth of a story. Now let's talk about drones. I'll start talking, but I want to open up to everybody else too. So this is, I guess, sort of a hot topic in journalism and in everything else right now. Drones, little helicopters you can send in to cover a story, who maybe put a camera on or a video camera, and let them sort of capture what's going on, do a little informal surveillance, if you will. Let's talk about both the potential advantages of this and the pitfalls. Let's start. Greg, you're a very imaginative guy. I know this. So you want to offer some thoughts on where you think these drones could go in the name of journalism, and what they could do for reporters and for news organizations.
Well, first of all, I think it's kind of a shame that we have all these humans here taking photos, videotaping, taking pictures, and there are no drones flying around covering this panel from an aerial view.
They are, taping us.
Yes,
that's right. Can anyone check?
Or maybe they're just very, very small.
But it does seem like it's a kind of thing where it could be, as revolutionary for journalism as the zoom lens on a camera, where, there is such a degree to which if you're not close, if you don't get access, it's you don't get the story. And anyone with power, be it a government or a company, when they're running an event, always tries to push the press line further and further back. So I think it's a very promising opportunity for journalists, I think, to learn this. At the same time, it's still very young. It's like any place that it's been used, such as actually our winner for the Journalism Shorty Award, Tim Pool, this year used it to cover Occupy Wall Street by flying a drone over it to show what the police operations were and what people were doing. So this is, I think just another one of these opportunities where, especially for young journalists or people trying to make a name for themselves, there's gonna be this period probably for the next 5 or 10 years where it's hard and challenging to do drone journalism in the same way that may have been hard and challenging to do web journalism 10 or 15 years ago, or social media journalism a few years ago. So I think there's a great opportunity for anyone who wants to get ahead by learning how these work, using them while trying not to hurt anybody or get arrested themselves. And I think whoever really figures that out will have a big advantage. And I think we're going to see, I think by the time we have this conference next year, there'll be like one really big, one famous photo that will make its rounds that was taken by a drone, not by a human. So I apologize to the photographer here for questioning the viability of their profession.
They're doing a wonderful job. I'm gonna toss this to both Anna and Mario. Either one of you can take this on. So can you picture the drone kind of moving in over the piazza to cover a protest, say in Italy, for a news organization, and bring back some visuals, or do you see some sort of automatic pitfalls there?
Well, I'd love to see that. I mean, I'd love the mix, because I think the human, touch in terms of interpreting what's happening is always very interesting, I think, because I think people like to read and follow how someone, just like you say, a picture. I mean, a picture taken by a person has a different look and feel than probably something taken from a machine. But still, I think, why not? Why not mix the two? I think we should learn how to mix the two and use them. And I think we are actually very eager, and we'd love to have the resources to buy lots of drones. I hear they're not very cheap, so that's a problem for as far as the budget for newspapers right now.
Probably get cheaper, though.
News organizations are waiting for them to get cheaper, so probably to try them out, just like we're trying out many softwares. But can I throw to you a question after?
Well, okay, let's finish up our drones first. I can't stop talking about drones.
I'd love to learn how to use drones.
Yeah.
I mean,
well, maybe there'll be a job for journalists operating the joystick. One thing that occurs to me about drones is that it seems like this very fancy whiz-bang sci-fi technology, but in some ways it's a little bit more of an incremental change than it may seem to some. I know that this is, especially if you look at sports coverage, I know that AP photographers often will set up remotes remote cameras, video cameras, and still cameras to capture the action. And I know that this was during the last Winter Olympics. I remember talking to our photo editor about some of the technology they used to be able to catch the skiers on the way down from locations where it wasn't easy for people to be. And they set up remote cameras under, at the bottom of a swimming pool, also during the Summer Olympics in that case. Piscina, I think I just learned that word today. Piscina, okay. The use of remote technology is something new. There's something different about the robots descending upon us, I guess, isn't there?
Well, I think there is. I'm not sure the only problems would be price. I think there is, at one point, incremental difference becomes, a main difference. And the main difference here is not remoteness, it's verticality. And well, and there as a journalist, of course, I want to be able to use any possible means to know what's happening, all right? So this is a given. From a more general point of view, we know that if we are in this room, we are supposed to be private. If we want us, we just lock the door, we are on our own, okay? Now, and if somebody just crashes the door or crashes the window, comes in and takes a picture, of course, this is something we don't like. And it shouldn't be done, right?
Right.
Okay.
Not that hasn't been done by journalists before, but it probably shouldn't be done.
Theoretically, okay?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Now, what if a drone hovers right in front of this window, right, and snaps a picture, and that's first thing. Then points at you a remote directional mic, and records what we're saying. I don't have an answer. Yeah. I say that this is not just incremental. This is something different.
Yeah, I think that this is what I wanted to get at, is there are obviously some pitfalls here, and there's going to be a lot of work to be done to figure out how to work with drones. Privacy is a huge issue. Whether if you're using one of these drones unannounced in a place that is not otherwise public, in particular, are you violating privacy standards and ethics? In some cases, even privacy laws. And I know the one particular challenge that we have in the U.S. with that is those laws can change from jurisdiction to jurisdiction in the U.S. in pretty dramatic ways. I suspect they're probably a little bit more consistent here, but privacy, big problem. The other thing is, and it was either Greg or Anna said something about trying not to crash into anybody, and I know that it was a little bit of a joke, but it's not entirely a joke. There are liability issues that I know. I mean, I've had conversations with people at AP just when we were sort of casually talking about drones, because we have conversations about various things there. And one of the worries that they have, and that we all have, is what will the liability cost be because of the potential risks involved. These are, they're not full-size helicopters, but they're these big things flying around in the sky. And if you crash into someone or do something to cause a car crash, that's a pretty serious problem. So I think we're a long way from figuring that out. I think people like Tim Pool, in some ways, can be at the vanguard of this, because he's not the kind of guy who's too particularly concerned about things like privacy and liability. He's sort of a rogue activist type himself, as he would proudly declare himself, I'm sure. And he's just looking to record something, which is understandable. But it's going to be hard for those of us in the mainstream media to take that step. Okay, Anna, you had another question that came in? And actually, at this point, if anybody has questions, go ahead and raise your hands. We'll take this one right now, but then we can take others from the audience.
As a matter of fact, the questions I found here are from him, so why don't you ask it yourself?
Oh, okay. We can all hear.
Some of these people I know, so I just realized that.
See, now we're spending an extra 30 seconds as a result of this, but that's okay. Yes.
I had two questions. You answer which one you prefer. I read a book last year, Trust Me, I'm Lying, of Ryan Holiday. So in a world where traditional organization, news organization, have less money, less revenue, do we risk that the business world has more spin on news? And the other one, you talked about Andrew Sullivan and Nate Silver many times, not only in this panel. So I wonder, are they something special, or it's something that can be done by someone else?
Yeah, I think, well, first of all, with that second question, my instinct is that, at least right now, it's going to be pretty hard for most journalists to do what they do, which is a credit to them. I mean, they're obviously, they've done something to just not only develop their brands, but, I mean, in the case of Nate Silver, he's doing something unique. He essentially was doing something that nobody else in the world was doing in the way that he was doing it. And you can develop a business model around yourself like that. And Andrew Sullivan's a guy who's just been around for a long time, I think, and has established himself really well. What do you guys think about that?
You go ahead first. Then.
I was just going to throw in, I think they're both the most successful, but I think it's important not to discredit the idea just by looking at who the most successful are, because I think they're the most extreme case, but I think there are lots of people falling in the middle where they're not as famous or have as many followers as Andrew Sullivan or Nate Silver, but it's making a difference. Maybe it's causing them to get like that next level of promotion, or maybe it got them the job in the first place over the 10 other candidates. So I think while the most successful people are always going to be rare, I think it's happening in a big way with just about every journalist out there, any new positioning that's opening up.
Well, I mean, you guys probably don't know the Italian big stars in digital journalism, but I'm sure
only you, Anna.
No, but people here, I'm sure, know Massimo Gramellini. I think Massimo Gramellini, if he decided to go off and leave La Stampa, he's a big brand. I mean, he writes for La Stampa, and he's an author. He writes books. He goes on television. He's a brand in himself. So, I mean, we get the credit, and we are able to sort of include him in you know, his success is also our success, but I mean, he could definitely spin off and leave us and be totally successful without us. He doesn't need La Stampa. We need him. No, he knows that. We need him. Really, I think if he went on Twitter, he's not on Twitter. He decided not to be on Twitter. He's not a Twitter person. He doesn't have an account there. Actually, many fakes are trying to be there for him, and they tweet for him. But like there's fans who tweet everything that he publishes as if they were him. But I mean, he's on Facebook, and he's totally successful on Facebook, and all his editorials are published everywhere in social media, and he has huge amounts of fans. His blog, which is not really a blog, it's just simply the paper version of what he writes. It's a small, tiny editorial that comes out every morning on La Stampa in the front page called Il Buongiorno, which is, you know, good day, good morning.
Yeah. That's the one word
it's
we know.
It's the breakfast story, right? Yeah. So people read that and they socialize it everywhere, and that blog is the most clicked blog on the website of La Stampa, and is the most socialized brand on Italian Facebook. On all Italian Facebook, the brand that's most clicked is Massimo Gramellini. On Twitter, it's Beppe Severnini, who is a competitor at Corriere della Sera. So they chose to diversify their social media presence. So I think they could definitely spin off and be very successful, but unfortunately, I don't think we, the middle guys, can afford to do that.
So I want to hear the first question. I didn't catch quite the end of it. Is the microphone still nearby? The first question that you were asked?
The biz question.
Yeah, the influence of in other words, the influence of essentially, shall we say, the need to make money on the journalism itself. Yeah, well, okay, this seems like something that you could talk about, probably, Mario. I mean, obviously, I mean, when I started as a journalist, and it's been, you know, getting close to 20 years at this point, it was there was essentially what we would call a brick wall between those of us who were reporting the news and the people who figured out how to make money off of it. It seems like it seems like that wall is pretty well gone, at least in a lot of the world. I'm not quite sure if it's the same here. Do you feel like the need to increase revenue at media companies is interfering with the central principles of journalism?
Well, just very briefly. I think the frame here has always been different from what it was in the U.S. We always, as journalists, tried not to be influenced by business or commercial needs, but there's never been anything as close to the so-called cultural wall between business and editorial that we know in the States. So on one hand, we are on a better foot to understand the new situation, which of course is the one you described. On the other hand, we may have, you know, a slightly more difficult way with, you know, trying not to overdo what is being done. So the jury's out. I don't know. I think as journalists, single journalists at least, and probably, you know, newsrooms, we should try and resist, of course, any encroachment on our editorial decisions by commercial interests. I think this is not so easy, but not so frequent as people might think.
Okay, are we? Do we have time for another question, or are we pretty much? I guess we're pretty much out of time here. Okay. All right. Well, I guess we solved the problems here. I think the future. So the future of journalism. If everybody wants to, if I can recap here, the future of journalism is return to accuracy. We're going to be more accurate. We're going to be ethical. We're all going to use a whole lot of drones, which might interfere with number 2. I think that was actually pretty much it. And we can all be our own brand. So go out, be journalists, find the future. I really want to thank Mario for introducing us and for leading the way here, and Anna and Greg for being good panelists. And thanks for your questions. Enjoy the little bit that's left of the festival.
Grazie a voi.
Thank you, Eric.